$9 billion. Well, in 1990, Medicare cost $66 billion. So the government doesn't miss by a little bit, the government misses by an awful lot. So the first thing is we put in place a very, very expensive program, and right now, unfortunately, the fact that we have a $16 trillion debt, the last thing we can afford is more cost. The Affordable Care Act also has lots of taxes. It has over $500 billion in taxes, and Congressman Bishop and I have gone back and forth on this in some debates, but a lot of those taxes are going to affect people here in the 1st Congressional District. They're not just rich people, but all sorts of people, everybody here. So that's a real issue as well. And the Affordable Care Act funds itself out of $700 billion of cuts out of Medicare. And again, we talk about the Medicare Trust Fund. Congressman Bishop has been there for 10 years, and it's true. Medicare is in deep trouble. Social Security is in deep trouble. I just don't understand why Congressman Bishop and his colleagues on both sides of the aisle couldn't get these things fixed. Everybody acknowledges they're broken. Everybody acknowledges that they're at risk. Why didn't they sit down together and make it work? So there are good elements in the health care bill. I try to enforce those, but let's put in other good elements and make this really work. Let's attack the cost problem. Because one of the biggest issues we have right now, our healthcare costs are spiraling out of control. We could spend 100% of our GDP on healthcare. We've got to get them under control. And common sense things, some of which Congressman Bishop doesn't support, like tort reform, allowing insurance companies, forcing them to compete more. These are things that we should be adding into a common sense bill that isn't 2,000 pages, but is short and readable and makes sense.
Can we go back to work?
Sure.
I'll speak for myself. First off, on cost. 250 economists signed a letter saying that the Affordable Care Act includes in it virtually every cost containment measure healthcare experts recommend to put into our healthcare system. The CBO, Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan scorekeeper of what Congress does, has said that full repeal of the Affordable Care Act would add $800 billion to our deficit. That's what the CBO says. Taxes. There's not a dime in the Affordable Care Act with respect to tax increases that affect families making less than $250,000 a year. The tax increases that are in the Affordable Care Act only apply to families that make more than $250,000 a year. And on the issue of the $700 billion, it's really important that people understand this, because if they don't, it's a scare tactic. The $700 billion represents a reduction in the rate of growth of Medicare expenses. We're still going to spend $7 trillion on Medicare over the next 10 years. We would be spending 7.7 if these cost containment measures had not been put into place. And that's why the Medicare Trust Fund is extended for 8 years. Now, what I hear my opponent saying, and obviously he'll speak for himself as I am, what I hear him saying, he said in the summer of 2010, we can't afford Medicare, quote unquote, we can't afford Medicare. And yet he doesn't want to put in place any cost containment measures. Now, I just don't understand that. If we say we can't afford it, then doesn't what we want to keep it, which I certainly do, and the overwhelming majority of seniors want us to, then we have to find a way to deliver the same level of care more efficiently and less expensively. That's what the Affordable Care Act does. What I hear my opponents saying is, no, you can't do that, because if you take $700 billion out of Medicare, you're hurting Medicare. What you're doing is you're accelerating the insolvency of Medicare unless you make the delivery of the care more efficient and less expensive.
Right.
We disagree about a lot of things here. First of all, Congressman Bishop runs around with, Randy said we can't afford Medicare. Well, let's first figure out the circumstances under which Randy said that. Congressman Bishop had somebody put a tape recorder in their pocket and grab me somewhere and ask a question, which is not an uncommon tactic, it seems to be. The second thing is, yes, unless we make changes to Medicare, everybody agrees the system is going to go bankrupt. So if that's news to you, Congressman, I think that's right. So we all agree the way it exists today, it can't last. And it's just simply not sustainable. And now you say there are no taxes on people making less than $200,000. The Supreme Court just ruled that the Affordable Care Act itself is a tax. And if you decide not to take insurance, you get taxed. And that's not just on people who are making more than $200,000. But People with Cadillac insurance plans, which is a lot of the labor unions have Cadillac insurance plans. In 2018, there's going to be a large tax on quote-unquote Cadillac's insurance plans. And I think we can both agree that the men and women in the labor unions, there's always exceptions, but those are not folks making more than $200,000 a year. They're going to get hit on that. There is a significant tax on medical devices. Now understand that the medical device companies are going to pass that cost on. And maybe the federal government won't pay for it, but 50% of the cost, of the reimbursement cost from that come from the states. So in fact, Steve Ballon's going to be very upset at you because we're going to have to pay more. First the state, Governor Cuomo, will be upset, and then it's trickled down here to Steve Ballon, he'll be upset too as well. So we do that. The Affordable Care Act puts many people into Medicaid. That cost is shared, and the government's going to give a break for some states for a while. Some of that was political horse trading of the worst kind, but eventually that burden is going to go to the states, and it's going to go to local municipalities. So we are, in fact, going to be paying a large portion of that bill. Now, the other thing is, and I just don't understand this, if you're cutting $700 billion from Medicare for this plan, I don't understand how that's not hurting a program which is already in trouble. And some of it, by the way, is phony math. You assume when the Democrats passed the bill, they assumed the bill was only going to cost $800 billion. That included so-called the doctor every year lowering dramatically the reimbursement rates to doctors. Well, President Obama has assured doctors that he's not going to do that, and that they'll do what they've done every year, which is the doc fix, because doctors won't stay providing that health care under the new reimbursement rates that this would force. So again, $500 billion that we supposedly weren't going to pay for are going to be gone because we're going to have to pay realistic reimbursement rates to doctors. At a time when you're putting millions of people into a system, the last thing you can do is afford to drive away the providers and shrink the supply. And so we're going to have to give them the money they want, and that's going to cause this plan to be radically more expensive than you ever projected.
Okay, gentlemen, can we just one more back and forth?
Just to be clear, the doc fix, so what we refer to as the doc fix, is included. The presumption that Medicare reimbursement rates would go up is included in the cost of the Affordable Care Act. No reasonable person, if we don't act, Medicare physicians will have their reimbursement rates reduced by 29%. No way in hell is anyone going to let that happen. No Republican going to let it happen. No Democrat's going to let that happen. It includes an increase in the reimbursement fees. As far as, well, I'll stop. I'll just stop.
Briefly.
When the original cost of the budget, so I'm not sure what we're agreeing on the cost of the Affordable Care Act. If we're agreeing with the CBO's latest estimate of $1.7 trillion, then we're there together. But let's be clear, when the Democrats and when you originally voted for that bill, that did not include the so-called doc fix in it. It assumed that the doctors were going to take the pain on that, and I agree with you 100%. My wife's doctor, my brother's doctor, that wouldn't be sustainable for the system. But let's just be clear that the real cost of this is $1.7 trillion, and that's optimistic because the government never comes in the budget.
The latest CBO estimate is that the Affordable Care Act reduces our deficit in the first 10 years by $109 billion and reduces our deficit in the second 10 years by $1.1 trillion. They are our scorekeepers. They're the ones who establish these rates.
Randy, the last word. Okay. Next question is to you, Randy. Just up the road is Peconic Bay Medical Center, which has a yearly operating budget in excess of $100 million. It's one of the biggest employers out here, not to mention a leading healthcare provider. A full 10% of the medical center's budget, roughly $10 million, if not more, is for uncompensated care. As a community hospital, anybody who wants care can get it, and they can do nothing if those people can't afford to pay. With what the, how does Obamacare change that, or does it? And whoever is elected, if you get a call right after you're swearing in from Andy Mitchell, the president, saying, I'm losing $10 million a year, what do you tell them?
I'm going to help. Look, first I want to applaud it. I know there's just been rankings of the medical center, really applauding them for the terrific care that they're providing, which is, a salute to everybody who works there and is involved with it. Look, the problem, we're going to sort of go back to something that we were talking about before, and I understand the issue of uncompensated care that the hospitals are providing today, and using the emergency room as your health care provider. But the issue that hospitals have as well is spiraling costs. And the issue I have with the Affordable Care Act, one of many issues, is it doesn't address the cost problem. And that's the thing that's getting us, and even under the, the Medicare itself, which is supposed to be very tight with costs, the cost for Medicare have been skyrocketing every year as well. And as a business owner, and we offer health care to our employees, our premiums are going up double digits every year. And the Affordable Care Act doesn't do anything about that. And again, I go back to some common sense things I think we could do that would begin to lower the cost of health care. Things like tort reform. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why we should let trial lawyers get rich on this in an unreasonable way. Obstetricians in Suffolk County spend an average $175,000 a year on malpractice insurance. That's before they deliver one baby. That's not sustainable. And make no mistake, that insurance costs the insurance, whether or not it's in a private practice or it's through the hospital, gets passed on to the patients. So it's extremely expensive. Insurance companies basically can't compete across state lines. Insurance is regulated on a state-by-state basis, and there are strict restrictions. So if you're an employer and you try to buy health care for your employees, there are very few choices that you have. And as a result, the cost of insurance is extremely high. So there are things that we can do to bring down the cost of health care. That will help hospitals. That will help them so when they do have unreimbursed care, and we are compassionate people, we are never going to turn somebody away who comes to the emergency room and needs care, regardless of under what circumstances. That's a responsibility that I know as Americans we're all proud of. But if we can bring down the cost, we can handle that. Because right now the hospitals themselves are groaning under this huge burden, which is making it very difficult for them to operate.
The American Hospital Association endorsed the Affordable Care Act. The Nassau Suffolk Hospital Association endorsed the Affordable Care Act. Andy Mitchell endorsed the Affordable Care Act. And one of the reasons they all did is because of the fact that it would bring to the healthcare system 30 to 35 million more paying customers, thereby driving down the level of unreimbursed care that they have to provide. And please know, by the way, that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the unreimbursed care that are provided in our hospitals is to U.S. citizens, not to an immigrant population. Ask any hospital administrator, they'll tell you. So the reason they supported the Affordable Care Act is because it would help them address one of their biggest problems. And so if we're talking about repeal, then we're talking about now adding to the number of uninsured people, and that hurts hospitals. I will say again, 250 economists and healthcare experts said that the Affordable Care Act included virtually every cost containment measure healthcare experts recommend we pursue. So when I hear my opponent say that it doesn't contain costs, I don't understand what he's talking about. When I hear that the Congressional Budget Office scores the Affordable Care Act as reducing our health care costs because of all of the provisions in it that would reduce costs, again, I don't understand why he would assert that there are no cost containment provisions in the law. There are lots of them, and some of them are already starting to work. So, and the law is still now being phased in. So if I were Andy Mitchell, I would be coming to both me if I remain in Congress. If he were coming to me, he would be saying to me, please make sure that you protect the Affordable Care Act. And if he's coming to Mr. Altschuler, he's going to say, please don't vote to repeal it.
Again, I don't live, I'm not in Washington. I haven't spent my life in politics, but I will tell you in the business world and the world of everybody I speak with, nobody thinks healthcare costs are decreasing right now. And nobody thinks that in the near future or in the long-term future they're decreasing. Everybody is facing increases in costs. I mean, if you ask any business owner that, you ask any individual that, the reimbursement of the deductibles are going up, the costs of the pharmaceuticals are going up, the drugs are going up, the co-pays are going up. So this is a system that with the Affordable Care Act coming in is not gotten at all better. And yeah, I agree, there are too few people who are insured, but one way to get more insured people is to lower the cost of health care. There are millions of Americans who would want to buy health care, but simply can't afford it today. And the reason they can't afford it, some of the reasons they can't afford it is because you don't have a competitive market. I'll give you an example, LASIK, surgery to treat what LASIK surgery is. that is something that is not usually reimbursed. So when that first originally came out, it was a very expensive procedure. But because of competition and because people had to jockey for your business, the cost of that has been radically reduced. And we see that over and over again when people have health care that they have to pay for and it isn't reimbursed by the government, it forces the provider to be more attentive to their customer and bring down the cost. We don't have a system that exists like that today. We don't give consumers choices of different plans to buy. You have to buy one kind of plan. It doesn't matter if you're 21 years old or if you're 91 years old, you have to buy a plan that covers the same things. If we offered more choice and a catastrophic plan for some people, different kinds of plans, then they would be able to buy insurance, and we'd have less of a case of people who aren't insurance when they come into the hospital. But again, I think it defies the reality of the world that healthcare costs are decreasing. Nobody thinks that, not as a business owner or as an individual consumer of healthcare.
Tim, you get the last word on that.
First off, no, I don't think anyone is asserting that healthcare costs are reducing. What people are striving for is to reduce the rate of growth of healthcare costs, which have risen at a rate 2, 3, 4 times the consumer price index for the last 20 or 30 years. And we have to get a handle on that, and the Affordable Care Act is a way to do that. I hear Randy talk about introducing competition into the system. I couldn't agree more. But I would ask him to recognize that the exchanges, the insurance exchanges that will be set up either state by state or if states choose not to set them up by the federal government, are the essence of competition. The exchanges will be where insurance companies come together and offer their product, and they will compete on the basis of price, and they will compete on the basis of service. That is the essence of the free market system. That is the essence of competition. And it is expected, it is assumed that that level of competition will hold down the rate at which insurance companies have raised their rates. In the 10 years before the Affordable Care Act was passed, insurance premiums went up 118% before the Affordable Care Act. So please, let's not think that we had a perfect system that we could just leave alone. We were bankrupting government, business, and people with rates going up 118% over 10 years. These exchanges, given a chance to work, have the potential to hold down the rate of increase because they will be competing with one another directly in exchanges on the basis of price and on the basis of service.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I would just remind those listening on WPPB-FM, you can phone in your questions at 800-394-8830. That's 88.3 FM. And here's a question that came in from the audience. I'm not sure if it is based in truth or not. You can help me with this, Tim. Why are the President and Congress exempted from Obamacare?
Oh, I love this question. Short answer is they are not. And I will refer anyone who thinks they are to Section 1302 of the Affordable Care Act. And please read in Section 1302 that members of Congress and their staffs are required, as of January 1st, 2014, to give up their participation in what's called the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, which every federal employee participates in, except active duty military, and join the exchanges. So of the entire country, the only 535 people plus their staff that will be required to participate in the exchanges will be members of the United States House of Representatives and member of the Senate. Section 1302. Please read it.
I think people may be, we can go back and check what Congressman Bishop said, but let's be honest. I mean, Congress, they just passed a bill, sort of a half-hearted bill, banning insider trading among Congress people. There is a consistent history of the elected officials in Washington, and again, I say this not just to Democrats, but to Republicans as well, who live by a different standard and have to adhere by different laws. And the District of Columbia is often exempt from the laws that are passed by the U.S. Congress. And again, somebody may have followed, somebody actually had the nerve to say that the Congress people should be banned from doing insider trading, and that was sort of a revelation, and they finally got something, although it was incomplete pass. I do want to go back to something that Congressman Bishop ended before, and I think it's important about these health exchanges, as he talked about how those will bring down costs. Well, understand the health exchanges are, the government tells you you have to offer this plan, this is exactly what you have to do, and it doesn't allow, again, insurance companies to go into different markets. So bringing everybody together, and by the way, it's still going to be a very small group of players there, and basically telling them this is exactly the plan that you have to offer, and it's a group of bureaucrats in Washington who eventually, you know, the famous iPad board that's going to eventually tell you how you do it. Those are the folks, that's what you have to offer. That's not going to help create real competition and price competition. You're giving people no choice of offering different kinds of plans, and you're not offering different entrants the ability to get into the market. That's how you're going to break open. That's true competition. Competition is bringing a bunch of people together and saying you do it this way, only this way, and now tell me your best price. There's no room for innovation there. Nothing, no price is going to decrease under that kind of scenario.
Couple things. First off, what I'm saying is accurate. Section 1302. Read it, and then see whether what Mr. Altschuler says still gives you pause. Okay? Secondly, there is not a set of plans that people must adhere to. There are 3 tiers of plans that provide minimum levels of coverage. The insurance companies may decide to modify those plans so long as they provide the minimum levels of coverage that are required in the plan. By the way, something that the state of New York has had for years. You can't buy an insurance policy in the state of New York that doesn't cover mammography. You can't buy one that doesn't cover colonoscopy. Yet you can all over this country. All that the Affordable Care Act is really doing is putting in place a set of standards that New York has had for years. And I haven't heard an outcry from New Yorkers about the fact that they have policies that cover things they're going to need, that they're going to services and coverage that they're going to want. So we should really, let's just try to have an honest discussion here. Let's not try to have a discussion that's engaged in scare tactics. Let's have an honest discussion. What the Affordable Care Act is putting in place is essentially what New York has had for years as it relates to coverage and policies.
You get the last word.
Thousands of employers, including many labor unions, are asking to be exempted out of the health care plan. So I don't think that anybody anticipates, despite this nirvana that you're portraying for us, Congressman, nobody anticipates that this is going to be the panacea that you talk about. And you're right, and I've talked about this before, we have a problem. Individual states dictate different standards, and that has helped drive up the cost of insurance. So I think we have to acknowledge that one size doesn't fit all. And the last thing, the minimum standard is the New York standard, telling everybody exactly what they have to do, and they could do more than that, but here's a very healthy standard that everybody has to adhere to, doesn't give people a choice. And if you're 21 years old, and you've just graduated from school or whatever, or you're just starting working, you may want to buy a plan that has a very high deductible. You might want to take advantage of an HSA. If you're older in your life, and you may want different benefits and different coverage. So it really depends on your state of your life, but basically the federal government is coming in, and some bureaucrats are coming in and dictating to you this is the way it's going to be.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Believe it or not, we're coming close to the end of the first half of the debate, which is dedicated strictly to healthcare. I think we can squeeze in one more question, but I ask you to please keep your answers as brief as possible. Mr. Bishop, you put out a press release today that says a nonpartisan group, the Kaiser Family Foundation, found in a poll that by an 18-point margin, Americans continue to prefer to continue Medicare as is. Now that goes against Vice President candidate Ryan's voucher system. Do you favor keeping it as is?
I absolutely favor keeping Medicare as a guarantee that seniors would have access to that would be affordable. What Congressman Ryan has proposed, what Mr. Altschuler has indicated he supports, is for people under the age of 55 taking Medicare and turning it into voucher care. Telling anyone who's 55 or under that when they turn 67, not 65, but when they turn 67, they would be given a voucher, and they would use that voucher to try to buy a private plan. And if they bought a plan that covered their health care needs, great. But if they didn't, they were on the hook for the balance. Now, the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that this will cost the average Medicare recipient $6,400 a year more than they are paying now for traditional fee-for-service Medicare. if you put that in the context of the average Medicare recipient making $23,000 a year, that's what the average Medicare recipient lives on, to add $6,400 of medical expense is simply unsustainable. It can't be done. So I absolutely oppose Congressman Ryan's plan. Virtually all of my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle do as well. And I believe that we have an obligation to seniors. These are seniors who have paid into Medicare their entire working lives. If someone is 55 and they've been working since 22, they've been paying into Medicare for 33 years. And we're going to tell them we were only kidding. We're just going to give you a voucher now when you turn 67 and we hope it works out for you. I can't support that. And actually, I very much hope that the majority of the Congress will not support that.
I also absolutely want to protect, defend, and believe in the right of people to have Medicare. And it is something that people have paid into. The word entitlement is often thrown around, but it is not an entitlement. People have paid for their Medicare, and it is a responsibility of our government to provide it. Now that said, let's be realistic here. Congressman Bishop has been in office for 10 years. He has voted, and you can tell me this and that, but he has voted to cut over $700 billion from Medicare. One of us has made that vote. While Congressman Bishop has been in office for 10 years, he, along with members of both parties, have failed to put in fixes so we don't have a looming bankruptcy of Medicare. Part A, 2024, whatever the date is, even under the device, 2024, Part A Medicare is going to be exhausted. That's the hospital reimbursement. So he has been there for 10 years, and this deep-seated belief he has in protecting it, they haven't done anything about it. Now, it's also mischaracterized Congressman Ryan's plan. Together with Senator Wyden, a Democrat, they have put forth a plan that offers traditional Medicare as an option to seniors. So you have both the voucher, the ability to go into the marketplace and buy Medicare, and you also have the option to buy or to use traditional Medicare as well. You have both options on the table, and that $6,400 number that you keep on throwing out doesn't apply to that plan. And again, it was done together with Democrats. But make no mistake, only one party has put forth a plan, or actually on a bipartisan basis they put forth a plan to solve the Medicare problem. I haven't seen any solutions from Congressman Bishop about how he's going to fix it, even 2024 beyond. That's right around the corner. So if we are faced with only one solution and the other side throwing mud, particularly people who have been in office for a decade, I don't know how you get anywhere. So I said over and over again, I repeat it again, no solution is perfect. When I get to Congress, if I get to Congress, I would be more than happy, and I think it's the only feasible way, to sit down with both sides and work out a proposal to make sure that we protect Medicare for future generations. That is absolutely responsibility. But throwing mud at one plan without providing your own plan doesn't make any sense. And that's unfortunately the problem we've had in Congress, not just with Congressman Bishop, but with both sides. And that's why we need a change, and that's why I'm running.
This will be the last back and forth.
I'm very amused. Whenever I say something critical, I'm throwing mud. Whenever he says something critical, maybe he's throwing mulch. Who knows? Look, we put in place a law. He says we haven't done anything. We put in place a law that extends the life of the Medicare Trust Fund by 8 years. He wants to repeal that law. What's his plan as of 2016? We know what he wants to do as of 2022 or 2023. He wants to turn Medicare into voucher care. What's he going to do in 2016? What's his plan? I haven't heard that. And I'll tell you something else. The very first bill that the Republican leadership put on the floor in January of 2011 was a bill they called Repeal and Replace. Repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they charged 3 committees with coming up with policies to replace it. Guess what? They voted 33 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Talk about an obsession. They have not had a single hearing in any one of the 3 committees on a single plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. So please don't lecture me about not having a plan when we have a plan that extends the life of the Medicare Trust Fund by 8 years, and you don't have a plan for what we do as of 2016.
I'm sorry, can we please keep that down because we're just taking time away from the candidates. This is the last word on health care.
The mulch guy will go here. Look, two things here that sort of puzzle me. One, first, is you are in Congress and you've been there for 10 years. I haven't been in Congress. And somehow I've inherited all of your frustration with the Republican Party because you are clearly frustrated. They're always the reason for everything that's gone wrong. And I've made it very clear, by the way, and that it's not just the Democratic Party, it's not just you, but it's both sides. That's why we need to clean house. That's why we need to make changes. But the second thing is, I think it is far-fetched to say that the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act is going to fix the problems in Medicare, and that's why the Affordable Care Act was put in place. And the $700 billion of cuts, by the way, are for reimbursements of healthcare. $260 billion from hospital services. Some of it's from Medicare Advantage, $156 billion. $66 billion from home health services. $39 billion from skilled nursing services. So let's all be honest here. When you start making those cuts and people start getting upset about those cuts, what are we going to do? We're going to spend the money to give that money back. The same thing with you pushed out the 2008 the tax on the Cadillac plans for labor unions. Let's be honest. In 2018, if you're still in office, you're never going to go through with that tax. And the cost of the Affordable Care Act is suddenly going to be much higher than you said it was originally. So let's deal with reality. Somehow cutting $700 billion of reimbursements from a program that's on life support doesn't extend the life of that program.
It does.
And that does not signify an actual attempt to fix Medicare by putting in place a giant program like the Affordable Care Act, which is going to cost this country almost $2 trillion, at least.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. That brings us to the end. Okay, now you're going to talk. That brings us to the end of the first half of the debate, and we will now open it up to questions of a general nature. Again, I'll remind